Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I am your host God of Heroics, and today we are going over an article that we talked a little bit about in the previous video. So there was a lot of information going around amongst the data miners and people who consume their content, basically believing that characters and other content that was left within the source code of Marvel Rivals back in Season 0 and at the upstart of Season 1, that not all of it was 100%. Some people are believing that a lot of it was a little bit of trolling that the devs were doing, leaving information here in the game saying that we were going to get certain characters, events, outfits, etc. And in terms, turned out to be that that wasn't going to be the case. A lot of people believe that they were just leaving this stuff in there to misguide a lot of players, and that there were some people that were on the dev team that were doing this so that we would know what is to come. However, it has been been debunked, and we now know that all that stuff is true, but there is a little bit more context to it. It's not necessarily that, hey, we put this information in here, these are the characters you're getting. There's a little bit more nuance to it, and we're going to go over that today with an interview that was done with IGN. So if you like these type of videos, please like to subscribe to the page and hit that notification bell so you can be notified to all future uploads. And without further ado, let's get started. So this is the article in question on IGN's site called Marvel Rivals Dev says they're not trolling data miners. We'd rather spend our time developing the game. I'm going to leave this link in the description below as I did in the previous video. And then there was a quote here describing pretty much basically what may have happened. It says it was like someone doing scratch paperwork left a notebook there and someone decided to open it with no context. Off the bat, this basically sounds like the stuff that was found in the source code was left there from when they were basically testing things out, seeing how things are going to work and if it's even possible for them to do it in the first place. And they may not have scrubbed all the details or may not have even left all the details and context as to what it was that they were doing. And when data miners found this information, they just took it at face value and figured, well, Nightcrawler's name is right here, says Kurt, so we're getting Nightcrawler in the game, etc., etc. And it just sort of snowballed into a thing where we were saying that we were going to be getting these characters and maps. And it seems that we got so much information about what we were possibly getting that we basically started to kind of just believe on our own that maybe not all of this is real. Because when a game like this that just came out starts giving you a long list of characters, you know, Cyclops, Professor X, Paste Pot P, Locust, all these other character names, it's like, you know, we don't believe that all of this is possible because, you know, this game is new and you're giving us this list of characters and you're only doing, what, 2 characters every, like, 45 days or something? So, realistically, we would believe maybe some of these aren't necessarily real. It wouldn't make sense that we would be getting all of these characters, especially not all of these characters being known about in such a short amount of time. But anyway, we're going to stop dilly-dallying and we're going to go through the article. Feel free to go through the article yourself, or you can pull up the article and follow along with me if you want. So it says, Marvel Rivals data miners think the developers are trolling them with a list of potential future characters hidden in the game's code. But NetEase and Marvel say they have better things to do, like actually make the game. This is another thing that I mentioned in a previous video. Sorry, I'm kind of cutting back and forth, but this is another thing that I mentioned where I said that if they're developing the game, there are certain things that we can find that would prove this is what we're getting, and depending on what kind of information we're getting, it would tell whether this is true or not. For example, the idea of the Kraken. How it's said that we're going to be getting the Kraken. Well, we have a full model for the Kraken. We have movement patterns, idle animations, AoE animations, and a death animation. And that kind of stuff, it wouldn't just be put in the game and left there if it was going to be fake news. Whereas something like just seeing a character's name or code name or whatever in the game, like Beast, being in the source code, would be a lot easier to just put in without saying, oh, we're going to get that character, because that's not as much work or nearly as much work being put in. But from what they're saying, it seems like all they're doing is working on the game and we're just finding the remnants of whatever they're doing. So, it says last month, data miners began sharing names of potential future heroes hidden in the code of Marvel Rivals, a few of whom seem to be confirmed pretty quickly as real when the Fantastic Four were officially announced. However, as the list of data mined heroes grew, a different rumor began to circulate in the community. Some of the names were fake, planted there by developers to mislead data miners. And this is what I was saying. There just became so many names that it kind of became impossible to know what is and is not real. Even now, there's disagreement in the community as to which, if any, of the data mine characters are really being seriously considered for the game. We recently had the opportunity to directly ask Marvel Rivals producer Wei Kong Wu and Marvel Rivals executive producer Danny Koo, their names rhyme, if they're secretly performing an elaborate troll. And while it sounds like there are no pranks being pulled here, we should still take all the names being found in the code with a grain of salt. Here's what Wu had to say. So this is the direct quote from Wei Kong Wu himself. It says, "So first, we want to say that we don't recommend anybody to make adjustments to the files of the game," he began. Also, you can see that for each character's design, actually we come through a very complicated process and we make a lot of concepts, trials, prototypes, developments, etc. So there could be some information left in the code, and it might mean that we have tried some directions and they may appear or may not appear in our future plans. And whether or not they will appear in our future pipeline is highly depending on what kind of gameplay experience our players would expect in our game. So, breaking it down, essentially, they're saying that when it comes to putting a character in Marvel Rivals, they go through a lot of trial and error when it comes to concept designs and what movesets could be like in developing, different stuff regarding the characters. And basically, they're testing all this stuff out in the game and seeing if the game itself is going to respond properly to these characters and what they can and cannot do to get all these things implemented within the game, and whether or not they should implement it in the game. And what we're finding in the source codes is just remnants of their test trials. So it doesn't necessarily mean that these characters are going to be in the game, and it doesn't mean that they're not going to be in the game, but it's also not a list of characters being intentionally used to misguide. All these characters that we have found within the source code via data mining are characters that have at the very least been considered for the game. And whether we have their actual designs, whether we see their actual concepts or not, this is just what they've had and what they've put into the game just for the sake of testing to see what does and does not work. And it all comes down to the gameplay experience of what the players pretty much are going to want. But this is a really interesting way to do that, while it's not intentional. When they leave this kind of stuff in the game and players or get data miners pick up on it and they see, for example, oh, we're getting Scott Summers or Cyclops in the game, it allows them to release that information, and then the people viewing that information, myself included, will see this and be excited about it, or like with Paste Pot Pete, be very skeptical about it. And while again it's not their intention, it does allow them to see how the fans would react to something of this nature. For example, the Hood has his entire, or at least a decent amount of his moveset, probably all of it, already leaked online. And we've seen this kind of information. The same thing happened with the Human Torch and Mr. Fantastic. The same thing happened when they released all the information on Ultron. And because we get to see what this kind of stuff is, we also get to form our own opinion on what this kind of character is going to be and how fun or unfun the character would be, in our opinion, to play. So it says, Danny Koo added, "If I could have a 10-year plan, it'd be great, but the team experimented with a lot of playstyles and heroes. It was like there's someone doing scratch paperwork and then just left a notebook there, and someone, a data miner, decided to open it with no context." So like they're saying, they don't have an exact plan as to where they're going, or they don't have a plan saying what characters, what events, what skins, etc. are going to be in the game, but they're basically testing a bunch of stuff. They have people creating concepts for characters, people doing the research to see what kind of moves that they would have, people looking at what kind of mechanics would be involved and how it would, work and affect what is currently in the game and what kind of playstyles that they could create for these individual characters to keep everybody feeling fairly unique. But because they're basically doing all this work and experimenting it with no exact roadmap per se, it makes it a little difficult to say who is and is not going to be in the game. But like I said, we still can give our feedback as to how we feel about this. I do think this is a very interesting way to go about testing out who can and cannot come to the game, because it feels more akin to like the comics, where you could be reading a Spider-Man comic and then suddenly, bam, there's Cloak and Dagger. Or you can be reading a Daredevil comic and then suddenly, boom, there's Punisher. Or boom, there's, I don't know, Doc Ock or something like that. Like, the characters, it seems like, you're following the story of specific characters, which is an asset of the game, because there is lore, which we will go over in a different video. I plan to do a whole new series on that. But we have a set amount of characters, and their stories all fall into each other in different ways because every character is going on their own individual adventure. And I think that's a pretty interesting way to go about building the game, because it feels like you're doing the world building yourself. It goes on to say, I pushed a little, asking them point blank if they were deliberately trolling players. Ku replied, no, we would rather spend our time developing the actual game. In the same conversation, we also discussed how a character gets chosen to be added to Marvel Rivals in the first place. The two told me that the team plans updates roughly a year in advance and is committed to keeping its current pace and adding new characters every month and a half. For each update, NetEase first looks at what type of characters and skill set is needed to balance out the rest of the game and add variety to the roster, and come up with a list of several different possible additions. People told me that part of the NetEase strategy for achieving game balance is to focus less on aggressively tweaking existing characters to be perfectly fine-tuned, and more on adding new characters and experiences to keep things fresh, fill gaps, support characters that are a bit weak with new team abilities, or counter characters that may be a little too strong. So this right here is the full layout of how they decide who is and is not in the game, which explains all the characters that we've seen. For example, I heavily believe that Season 2 is going to be based upon the mutants, whether that be just X-Men or the Brotherhood members with Magneto in them. And it would make sense that would be the case, because if the plan here is that they decide this a year in advance, and they're also making a list of characters that should or should not work, well, more so should work with the theme that they've created. They're pushing for characters to do that. And then they're also looking at who's really strong, who's really weak, what kind of mechanics can be tweaked, what playstyles are available, or what playstyles could be supported more. They're looking at all of that and then deciding on their characters. So at first it seems, they just have general characters here and there that they may throw in, again, like Paste Pod Pete. I'm not sure how he would fit in anywhere, but they have this list. But then most of the characters that we've been hearing about are mutants. So we have our Professor X, we have our Scott Summers, Phoenix, Emma Frost, Nightcrawler. There's a huge myriad of characters. Beast, So in my opinion, stuff like that does tell us pretty much what direction the game is going in, whether that be for Season 2 or Season 3. Because we do have information on that, how I talked about in a previous video, how we have the Clintar map and Captain Marvel possibly coming as well. It all just seems to be falling into place together. So it continues on and says, once they have a list of possibilities, NetEase then takes these suggestions to Marvel Games and begin working on initial designs. From there, they look at what the community is currently excited about, as well as what's planned a year in advance in other Marvel divisions, such as if a big film or comic arc is coming that they can tie a character in with. That helps them come to a final decision on what's going in. All this explains why there might be a lot of different heroes listed in the codes. NetEase just has a lot of ideas that it's tossing around at the time. So there you have it, guys. Everything pretty much that we need to know about how this game is constructed, and why we have such a huge list of characters showing up in the code. And it gives you an idea of what kind of direction that these individual seasons are going in. Whether these characters all make it in or not, we can see a decent roadmap, and we also know that the films and comics and TV shows also do have a little bit of sway as to what we'll be getting, and we can kind of see that with some of the characters that we currently have in the game now. Some characters that aren't seen as too important, or characters that we haven't seen too much of, but now they are currently here because they've gained a little bit of popularity. In characters that are obviously far more popular, or other variants of characters that are a little bit more popular. So, like how we have Iron Fist. Lin Houlier isn't the most popular Iron Fist, but Iron Fist is a popular character, especially after being brought to the fold of the Netflix TV show. More people know about him, but they decided to go a slightly different direction with Iron Fist. Same thing for Psylocke. This is not the general Psylocke that we get in the normal X-Men comics, but it's a different variant of Psylocke. However, the name Psylocke is very recognizable. So, this ends with a little nod to what my next video is going to be about, since Marvel Rivals was great at launch, and each new character only seems to make it more powerful, with the Human Torch and the Thing said to be the latest characters joining the game on February 21st. We also spoke to Wu and Ku about the possibility of a Nintendo Switch 2 release for Marvel Rivals, which you can read about in a different article, and that is the article that we're going to be going over for tomorrow's video. So please like the video, subscribe to the page, and hit that notification bell so you can see when that video and all the preceding videos come out. And please let me know in the comments below, what characters are you definitely excited for, especially now that you know the process of selecting characters. Let me know, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.